Welcome to the only daily podcast focusing on compliance news of the day. Each morning, start your day with a cup of coffee and Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, to hear about 4 of the top compliance, corruption, or leadership stories you will need to start your day. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
The Daily Compliance News for August 23, 2021, the Transparency at Facebook edition. We begin with that story from the New York Times as Facebook, fearing a public outcry, shelved a report on its 10 or 20 most popular reports. The reason is the reports were either, their favorite post generally entailed right-wing nutbags or companies that businesses and individuals who were anti-vaxxers, obviously showing that Facebook is doing an incredibly poor job policing its platform as it has promised multiple times to do. So this lack of transparency really demonstrates that I think Facebook really has no interest in either policing itself or being transparent with those of us who use it. Next up, the Wall Street Journal reports that remote work could last for up to 2 more years. And as the longer COVID-19 keeps people at home, the harder it's going to be to get them back into the office. This is raising concerns among executives that the longer people are staying at home, the more disruptive it will be to getting them back to work. Of course, executives don't give a flying flip about their employees. They just want to increase productivity. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. But with the Delta variant, many companies have postponed fall 2021 returns to the office, even if it's on a hybrid basis, into mid to late 2022. So as risks change, compliance professionals need to consider this. Next up, a very troubling article from NPR, and it details the differences in military discipline based upon race, and tells the story of Army veteran Crystal Ellington, who was treated very differently from some of her white colleagues when she returned to the base late from a approved trip with her husband. And the reason this is so critical is veterans say racial bias will hinder recruitment and indeed lead to more difficulty around national security. So racial bias and discipline in the military service is something that the Biden administration is going to have to look at and try to remedy, particularly when those dishing out the discipline tend to be white males, and that the people receiving the discipline, of course, are not whites. And next up, in a story from the Financial Times, similarly related to our story about remote working, the ubiquitous road shows that used to go on with companies that were going public, where they would go to investors and put forward shows on a multi-city tour, have become a thing of the past during COVID-19. And what's interesting is that bankers are now really moving forward to not only appreciating but using the video conferencing aspects of Zoom and other platforms for this purpose. So the cost of road shows was obviously quite high, and now we may have a more efficient way to do so because of COVID-19. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network and a proud member of C-Suite Radio. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you'll join me again tomorrow.